Good afternoon, everyone. We are at the last session of the day one of our virtual conference. So we're lucky to have Dr. Els Vanderberg joining us from Berlin this morning at her time. So Dr. Els is currently an interim product lead and advisor. With a knack for strategic thinking. Her expertise lies in B2B software as a service or SaaS, product-led growth or PLG, and marketplaces. She bases her decision on a healthy mix of customer discovery, data analytics, and gut feeling. And her mission is to help tech companies build products that their customer love and want to tell others about. So I'll pass the time now to Els for her to do her presentation for us. Over to you, Els.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I'm very excited to be here today. So I'll just dive straight in because we don't have much time and it's a huge topic, actually. You asked me to speak about driving business changes through evidence-based product management, and that kind of has two core aspects, which are both huge to unpack. So firstly, it's about driving business changes, and the other one is the evidence-based way of working. So I figured I'll tell you about this through a little story. And I wanted to talk to you about a client that I worked with quite recently. This is actually not a B2B SaaS company, as is usually my turf. This was an e-commerce company, quite large, more than 500 employees. And there I was working specifically with one team within this pretty large landscape of 25 people, of which 6 in product. And as is quite usual with such big companies, the product is sliced into different pieces so that teams can move each piece autonomously. And this team was responsible for the product details page and basically the information displayed there. So I started with the diagnosis. And one thing I noticed quite quickly, this is super common. I've seen this with small companies, big companies. They worked in a pretty stakeholder-driven way, or also a feature-driven way. So what happened is that they had a pretty solid business development department, a solid marketing department, researchers, etc., but also upper management who just came in every once in a while and said, we should do this thing, right? Some things well-researched, other things not so well-researched. And of course, every once in a while, a manager stepping in saying, I was at a conference yesterday, they talked about AI, let's do something with AI. Right, so the product people very much saw themselves as the connector between stakeholders, giving demands, and developers kind of translating demands and saying, okay, this is the estimated time of arrival. Secondly, firstly, what was great, they had access to data, also self-serve access to data. Not every company has this. So they had a variety of tools and dashboards to look at to monitor stuff. Which brings us to the next issue. There were so many tools and dashboards that the team was pretty much overwhelmed. This is also extremely common. You spend a lot of time kind of staring at dashboards thinking, okay, and now there's no so what in the data. And last but not least, basically everybody in the team, especially the product people, had an extremely long to-do list of like 10 to 20 items that were all urgent and important. There were priorities, but there were like 20 priorities, which to me is kind of the concept of fake focus, right? We say there's focus, we have priorities, but if everything is a priority, it doesn't really work. So what happened was that everybody was starting a lot of things in parallel, but not a lot of things got finished. So in short, a lot of noise going on. Therefore, I made it my mission to help them trade that noise for focus. So I asked them a couple of questions. And the first question I asked was, what is the number one thing that we are trying to achieve? Of course, bringing in the number one to try to get that focus in. Firstly, as a company, and secondly, as a team. Luckily, there was a lot of pre-work done here already. I said it's a big company, so they have spent a lot of time in annual planning and doing all this stuff. And as a company, they wanted to increase revenue over the online shop. You might say, okay, that's a little bit generic, right? Who doesn't want to increase revenue? But honestly, I'm fine with it. in some cases, this is the most honest answer of what you're trying to do. So I'd rather be honest than fabricate something fancy. As a team, of course, this team handled the product details page. They wanted to make it as easy as possible for shoppers to select and buy their ideal products. So then I asked the second question and said, okay, so which number one product metric that we can move autonomously captures best whether we're achieving that team goal? Again, this is a huge sentence with a lot of stuff to unpack, so I won't dive into it. Of course, what stands out is that I'm asking for a product metric, so something that reflects a change in customer behavior, something that reflects the value our product brings, and of course, that we can move autonomously. This does not mean that this team should be the only team moving this metric. That is hardly ever the case in such a big company, but it does mean that they should be able to fully drive it by themselves. And it needs to capture best whether we're achieving the goal. So it can be any metric. It needs to be the one that does it best. And so I explained all this. We had a bit of a theory session. And then I invited the team in for a workshop to kind of ideate on this. And they came up with a bunch of metrics that they thought were cool or interesting. But in the end, we landed on the add to cart rates. And what I noticed here is kind of an anti-pattern, that the team members kind of came in with their ideas of, I want to measure all this stuff. And they tried to kind of plug that back in, right? So they were like, we need page load, we need all this stuff. But then if I asked them, is this really what captures our goal best? Not really. So then I asked them the third question, okay, we start with the add to cart rates. This is what matters to us. Which customer opportunities, which can be needs or problems or pain points, are most likely to have a positive impact on that number one metric? So I very much stole all of this from Teresa Torres, and I used her opportunity solution tree. And what is great here is that this add to cart rates, which usually you just stare at it and say, okay, it dropped by 1% or it went up by 3%, which still isn't super actionable, becomes actionable because it helps you drive decisions. So what I asked first, like in my first level, I split the tree in target audience segments because we saw a relevant distinction there between people who are ordering a specific product, like I always get my Alveda shampoo, I just want to get that one, or people who are ordering just shampoo and they don't know yet which kind of shampoo. And last one, people who are just browsing. So I took the target audience segment as my first level and then asked the question, why are these visitors not adding to cart? And we kind of filled that out based on gut feeling, where you would say, oh no, gut feeling is not allowed. In this case, to draft it for the first time, sure. But what we did after is we looked at all of the bubbles and added evidence. So we dug through service tickets and feedback boxes and app store reviews to kind of figure out which of these opportunities is actually true. And that's how we kind of could course a path and find a branch of opportunities that look most promising. And then going down the tree, of course, this is a very simplified version. We went all the way down, constantly asking why. Why is that? And why is that? And why is that? To kind of drill deeper into the problem space. And through collecting first preliminary evidence that we had lying around anyway, we could find the opportunity that looked most promising and ideate multiple solution ideas for that opportunity. And then the last question was, how can we test the hypothesis underlying our ideas in a minimum viable way? This is, again, very difficult, and I want to keep this short. This is the evidence-based way of working. And there I saw another anti-pattern, which I see all the time, is that the team wanted to immediately do a nice A/B test, right? The gold standard of testing, which I sincerely disagree with. I think it's just one test method amongst many, many test methods that can work. What was interesting, though, that when we looked at the idea backlog that we had, or the old backlog in Jira, that most ideas in that backlog actually were not associated to the most opportunity branches. Not at all. They kind of didn't belong to anything, which means they would most likely not have contributed to our goal at all. So again, quick recap. Through these 4 questions, we managed to go from spraying a lot of ideas to at least knowing where to begin. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you for that presentation. That was very exciting. I've got a quick question. The Teresa Torres opportunity solution tree, was that the map that you showed us, the ones with the bubble? Is that the framework? Is that the
Yes.
opportunity tree? Right.
So the
Okay.
opportunity solution tree, this is super simplified, right? In reality, it was much more complex. I really love this framework because it helps teams really tie the outcome together to solutions that might actually drive that outcome. And what we actually did was we had 3 of us do it separately and then later look at where we are aligned. And of course, we cheated because we drew it off of gut feeling. In reality, Teresa Torres does it differently and says you should draft the opportunities based on actual customer conversations that you are having, which is, of course, better. But to kind of get that process started and running also takes a lot of time. And we did have people with a lot of knowledge, having been at the company for 9 years, 12 years. So we decided to cheat a little bit.
And then after that, based on evidence from there onwards.
Exactly. And then we started the interview process and kind of made the evidence more solid as we progressed.
So it's a bit like the design thinking process, but instead of doing internally, this is done with the customers, getting the feedback.
Yes, I think like Teresa Torres writes in her book, Continuous Discovery Habits, it's all about talking to customers, co-creating with customers, interviewing customers, etc. And I like this quote, I think it's Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And we want to kind of get punched in the face early on. And within your team, you're not going to get punched in the face because everybody will be like, yeah, it's a great idea. Yeah. What you need to do is you need to talk to customers to kind of figure that out early and a lot.
Right. Thank you for that. I've got plenty of questions here on my notes, but before I begin, actually, I've noticed an interesting observation which I wanted to highlight about you, Els, is that I realized you actually studied Dutch law for your degree, and then German law for your master degree, and then human rights law for your PhD, if I observe correctly from LinkedIn. So why does, like a huge different shift into doing product management at the startup scene?
Yes. I kind of stumbled into the startup scene, I have to be honest. I started doing my PhD in 2012. I really liked law. I like research. I'm very good at sitting in a room and just kind of reading stuff and getting through large amounts of text and kind of distilling what matters. And I think that's kind of my power that helps me a lot in product management as well, right? Like I learned how to take a vast amount of information and kind of distill quite quickly what matters from that. But basically, I was starting my PhD and I needed some money. And a friend of mine was working at a startup and said, hey, we need people who speak Dutch who can pick up the phone in customer service. It's a student job. You'll make $10 an hour. It's 2 days a week. I'm like, sweet. So I started doing that and I kind of fell in love with the atmosphere. It was the first time that I worked in a job that I was like, this is amazing because of the pace and the intelligence of the people. And there's always fire, right? At the startup, there's always something on fire, something burning.
That's right.
And I just loved it. And I kind of never left.
Right. Our first session this morning was a conversation that I had with Ben Yoskovich, who was one of the co-authors to Lean Analytics. So our discussion was how to, leverage on data-driven methods to build, a startup fast. So obviously right now we're talking sort of similar thing, but specifically on product. So, and in my conversation with him, so obviously, if you're measuring something, right, and if you're doing something based on data-driven, evidence-based, you can't escape tracking your operational metrics or like this product metrics. So what are some of the product metrics that you think early startups, especially when they're pre-revenue, pre-product market fit, that they should consider or should focus on?
This depends very much on the business model, right? It depends a lot on what they're doing. I think it also depends a lot in which department they're in, right? We mentioned product metrics. So these are metrics that are relevant for product people. So I like this. There's a clear distinction between business metrics and product metrics. Business metrics are the ones that you need to monitor if your business is doing okay. Right? There's like these classic things of monthly active users, daily active users, revenue retention, customer retention, like the basic. If you're in SaaS, you'll need ARPU, average revenue per user, or average revenue per account. So but these are business metrics. When I started as a product person, I had all these dashboards with all this stuff, and I was just looking at this and going, all right, revenue went up or revenue went down. Cool, but what am I supposed to do with this, right? So for me, my eyes really opened when I understood this difference between product metrics and business metrics. These business metrics being lagging indicators of something else that happens before, namely a change in your customer behavior, which you can impact though, right? It's much easier to take that apart and use it as a frame for decision making than something that is so far downstream, like 90-day retention or revenue. So that depends a lot. Another issue, if you're talking pre-product market fit, I see this issue a lot. Everybody wants to be data informed because otherwise you're not doing it right. But in pre-PMF, you have very few data points, very likely, right? So you'll be staring at the usage of 4 customers or 10 who might not even be the right ones for you because you didn't crack your target audience yet. You're still learning about that. So it's very hard. You definitely can't be data driven at this point. At best, data informed. There has to be a lot of qualitative research on the side, and there will also be space for gut feeling, right? You can look at the behavior of 10 users and they seem to not be using your product at all, or totally wrong, or they're not adopting any of the features that you thought were going to drive everything. And you can conclude from that, if you're just looking at the data, that your product is terrible. And that might be true, but it might also be that those 10 people are just not the right fit for your product, right? So you have to have a deeper understanding, and you cannot be discouraged by what 10 people are doing. Also, statistical significance will be a pipe dream in this instance.
Yep, of course. Now, obviously, having metrics and being able to measure them is one thing, but like having to compare them with your counterparts or like your competitors, or like how either the verticals or the industry are doing, so that you know how far or how near you are, to whether you're doing bad or good, right? So in the event of, let's say, the lack of access to such data, what can pre-PMF founders do?
Yeah, so I would very much try to find data that's actually actionable for you. Because in the pre-PMF phase, so much is changing, right? There's pretty much no stability at all. Your value prop will be changing. Your target audience will be changing. You're likely not catching up with any of the people, like the industry benchmarks that are out there, like OpenView, Kyle Polar on LinkedIn publishes really great reports. But if you're pre-PMF, these are not for you, right? You're not going to live up to any of these benchmarks, probably, because these are benchmarks that are published by a VC, much more mature companies than you, very likely. So you can do that, but if you're just starting out, this might just be a very depressing exercise and also not very actionable, right? You'll find out, okay, our ARPU is much too high and we're not able to retain revenue. Shit. But that's the end of that, right? That's the end of analysis, I think. So I would really, again, try not like analysis paralysis is a problem. So try to avoid that by not staring at stuff that doesn't inform your decision making at this point. I think is very important.
So should we then just stick to the simple basic A/B testing then, and just see what moves the needle, and just thread along carefully and gradually until you know what you're looking for, and you're tracking like what really means something to you that will have a business impact?
Yes, even though I think A/B testing for a pre-PMF product, and especially in the product, it's you will not get to statistical significance, right? If you have 50 customers, it's just clearly not enough volume to get ever to sample size. So you can do that, but you won't be able to do it in the proper scientific method, which is fine, right? So you should kind of take that in stride and understand that you will not reach the confidence level that you're supposed to attain, that you will just get enough confidence to get a directional read, something that is better than a gut feeling. So again, saying it's not like you shouldn't look at metrics. I absolutely believe you should. It's just to understand that what you see happening in your product, in customer behavior, might not be reflective of your target audience. And also the early stage startups I work with, we work a lot more with qualitative data. So a lot more with, or actually both, right? Combining both quantitative and qualitative insights, but a lot of interviewing customers, shadowing customers, prototyping, usability tests, all of that good stuff in combination with what you see people actually doing in your product.
Right. Now, I want to jump over to the enterprise level a bit, because that's also what you have shared on your slide. You know, you were doing this exercise with a quite a large, 500-person team is quite a large company, especially in a Bruneian context. So what are the kinds of struggles that PM would face, at working at such a large enterprise? Let's say by now you've got many teams and maybe head of departments, and everybody will have their own, let's say, like strategy or thinking and approach. And how would you then try to champion, let's say, your new way of doing things? And especially when it will break the old system apart. How do you navigate through that kind of environment?
Yeah, this is very hard, I have to say. Like I said, I'm more familiar with the earlier stage, so this was definitely challenging. Right. And I think a lot of it does have to do with leadership buy-in. In the end of the day, some leadership buy-in. It doesn't have to be that they totally support everything, but just a basic understanding that working based on a mission and on goals is potentially better than planning for the entire year exactly which features we're going to deliver without caring whether those move to the needle. So what I saw very much in this big company, as I see often, is that there are these big annual planning exercises which need to happen because there are so many departments that need to kind of come in tandem, that need to have resources allocated to each other at the right time, at the right moment. And this is often done by predicting which features are going to be built for that year, and which directly conflicts with the idea of embracing uncertainty, directly conflicts with the idea of saying, we don't know yet which features we're going to be building this year, because we just know that we're going to be focused on these outcomes, and we will learn which feature is the best for these outcomes. Of course, you can try to do planning with outcomes. This is the ideal state. But most companies are not ready for that, right? It's like a huge shift in mindset, and it's just not what they're used to. And I said I was there working with one team within this large company. So we didn't really have that luxury, which kind of cuts you off at the knees a little bit to do it really effectively and right. But the reality of things is you need a lot of pragmatism to make things work, right? We're not going to get the perfect setting. We're not going to work in a Petri dish where everything is just beautifully set up. So here, luckily, as a team, so there was an annual roadmap defined, which is problematic. However, in there were lots of gaps, right? There was some freedom, some wiggle room for the team to adapt these more outcome-driven ways of working. There were holes. So we kind of used these to also act as a lighthouse within the organization and show other teams how we can also do it. You can't come in with a sledgehammer and say, from now on, we're not going to have these annual plans anymore. It's just not going to fly. And another big challenge, of course, is it's a team that owns this tiny slice of the product, and there are like 100 other slices. So finding something that is still meaningful to drive, that we can move autonomously, was challenging.
Sure.
Which is much easier in the kind of teams that I'm used to, where you have just one team that does acquisition and another team takes care of activation, like onboarding, and then we have a team that takes care of retention. Like a very clean cut, very familiar cut for me.
Mm-hmm. Right. So with that, how do you see here they were talking about evidence product management work hand in hand with the marketing team to come up with a sustainable go-to-market strategy, for instance, like finding something that would well, you're an expert also on product-led growth. Like how would this then help to build something, build a PLG motion that would help you to achieve your go-to-market strategy?
So you mean how does evidence-based ways of working do that?
Yep. That's
yes, right. 100%, right? Like, so I believe that as most product people, I think, I'm not saying anything earth-shatteringly original, but I feel that evidence-based ways of working are the only right ways of working, because the alternative we have is not evidence-based ways of working, meaning gut feeling, which tends to be wrong, right? I think there's like a wide variety of literature of why our gut feeling tends to be way off. There's a lot about our human biases, which are just terrible. Or not terrible, just human, right? So I don't think I have to dive into that. With PLG, it becomes like the experimentation part becomes more important for the fact that an SLG company kind of has the luxury. Like if I'm thinking SaaS, they will have this book a demo now button, right? It's a typical SLG, book a demo. You speak with the sales agents, you speak with somebody else, you jump through all of these human loops before you get to try the product. And this is a luxury for this company somehow, because they get to speak to a lot of people. And so you get a lot of insights and ask people, what are you looking for in a solution? What are your pain points? And understand how our solution can do that. And you can give them a tailored demo. In PLG, you don't get to talk to customers anymore, right? They're just on your website. They do everything on their own. Self-serving. So it's kind of key that your product takes on the role of sales agent, onboarding specialist, marketing specialist, does all of these steps in an efficient way that people will accept. So for instance, like what I often have done is put in a short onboarding survey where we kind of ask the questions a sales agent would ask. So kind of ask them, what are you trying to do with the product, especially if it's horizontal and it has a lot of use cases. Who are you? What are you expecting? Right? What does success look like for you? Where are you trying to get? Just understand all of this stuff, so I can offer them a tailored experience. But because you're not speaking to as many customers, you really need to be measuring that stuff, right? And you really need to be measuring their actual behavior in the product, so that you can make it better. Because in PLG, it's all about the UX, right? There's no humans that are supporting this. So the UX has to just be 10 times better or 100 times better. And you can only do that through rapid experimentation and learning as quickly as you can.
And how then would you decide when to kill a feature or a product in this approaches that you've mentioned?
I mean, there's no one size fits all answer to that, right? So I think you would look at the data, but then you would look for the story behind the data, right? Like I know a lot of teams who we would look at feature usage, right? That's a very simple one. So there's this classical matrix that you can build, which kind of includes on one axis feature adoption, how many people use it at least once. In the other side, feature retention, how many of those use it more than once. Right. So you can have features that maybe have very little adoption. Not many people have seen it, but then huge retention, right? From the people who do see it, they love it. So that's an interesting learning. That means that maybe you should drive more people there. If not many people adopt it and they also don't retain it, you could conclude from there that it's a bad feature. We should sunset it. But you have to look behind that, right? Like maybe, and this is a mistake that so many teams make, is that they just kind of push features out there, but they never actually launch it as in a public launch. They don't tell users that it's there. What is the point of it? They don't go to market for the feature. This is again why I think go to market is so relevant all the time. It's not just when you launch your startup, but you kind of have to launch your features. So then easy conclusion there would be, let's sunset the feature, but that might not be the right thing to do, right? So there's no one size fits all answer. You have to think about, why is this happening? What does that mean for us? But I think this adoption retention quadrant kind of helps you understand better what is the deal, but you have to look behind it.
I'm gonna switch a little bit and talk a little bit of pricing. I wonder if you've got some insight to share on pricing strategy based on these approaches as well.
I mean, it depends again a lot about on the maturity of your company. I think for pre-product market fit or for early stage companies, the recommendation is always to have value-based pricing, which I think is the hardest pricing, right? Like you have competitor-based pricing, which is pretty easy because you could just compare your competitors and you'll just be a bit cheaper, a bit more expensive. Easy. Which is in truth what 99% of startups I think are doing. Right? Because it's a pretty decent proxy somehow for value-based pricing. Value-based pricing means you should price a product at as a good exchange for the value that you create for your customer. The problem is that this is very fluffy, and most early stage startups don't know at all what kind of value their product means for customers. And what do? They look at competitors and take this as a proxy, right? Like, okay, if they're willing to pay this for my competitor, they might pay this. That might be the value for them. And I wouldn't sneeze at that, to be honest. Another way to do it, which is the official way, I think, to do it, is you can start with customer interviews. You can do this Van Westendorp, I think Van Westendorp in the diagram, where you have kind of this diamond in the middle. So you ask people, at which price point is this too expensive? Where is it just right? Where is it too cheap? And you kind of map that out. The big issue with this, of course, is that you asked people a very hypothetical question. And what we product people and researchers know well is that people are incredibly unreliable. And so people are very bad at answering questions, and even worse at answering hypothetical questions. And especially when it comes to about money, we're terrible at it. So this is a starting point. In some cases, we also skip it. You mentioned already Maya Voye, who's a friend of mine, and she once told me that she will just go into market and try to sell the product before it is built. So like pretend it's there and just say, and she said, if I can't sell it within 2 weeks, we're just not going to do it. And that's the real test, right? Just try to actually sell it at that price point. And this is where a lot of startups stumble.
It's unfortunate that we couldn't have but this time, but maybe hopefully for the future events. We've got a few questions here. I'm just gonna look into one of them. The first question here that we've got from the audience is, how can companies balance short-term and long-term product goals when making decisions based on evidence-based product management?
That's a tricky one. I think it's very hard for me to answer this in the abstract. Like I would more love some examples of what would be a long-term and a short-term product goal. And it also depends very much on the situation and like how short-term and long-term they are. I think short-terms, so I would love to have most goals be relatively long-term. Why? Because it takes time for teams to get acquainted with a goal. As said in my earlier talk, a goal should be associated with a metric, right? We need to be able to measure whether we're achieving a goal. And it takes time to get familiarized with metrics. So if we switch up goals too often, and therefore switch up metrics too often, we have to kind of start from scratch. Right? For a metric, let's say we had in the talk add to cart rates. Okay, good. We're going to focus on the add to cart rate. Let's get to know the add to cart rate. So we have to kind of understand, where has it been in previous times, right? How has it fluctuated over time? This we can very quickly analyze. But if we want to set a goal and say, I'm going to increase it by 5%, before we can confidently make such a statement, we have to really know this thing, right? And we have to understand, can we move it by 5%? So we have to have some first insights on strategies that are likely to work. Otherwise, promising I'll increase it by 5% is an absolutely random statement. So for this reason, I like to go for midterm or long-term product goals in the sense that they should be a bit stable over time. However, in a startup, they might not be, right? This can happen, but it should be your aim to be stable, slightly stable over time, although we should take in stride that it might not be the case. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So you just remind me back to the pricing questions earlier. So going back to, let's say, if we're looking at PLG, do you think that PLG necessarily has to be one that be deployed alongside freemium model, or like do you think other different monetization model can also complement a PLG strategy?
Of course, like a PLG, this is a common misconception, right? PLG equals freemium.
Yep.
Which is not the case. Firstly, it's so much more than that, and it's not only that. So a PLG motion, in short, means that you allow customers to try before they buy, and you allow them to kind of get to value on their own, without too much intervention. This can be done in a variety of ways, and I think freemium is a very well-known one, but also super tricky to make it work. I haven't seen many startups actually make a freemium model work, especially in the early phases. It can happen, but it's really, really hard because you need to be able to operationally support a lot of users before you can monetize one. If you think about like activation rates of 1%, I think it's like 2 to 5% on average for a freemium, 2 to 5% upgrade to paid. That means you need to, in order to get to 1 million ARR or less than that, you need to be able to support maybe millions of users.
That's right.
So it certainly isn't just that. Thank God.
So is this where you think some may explore an experiment, or maybe, maybe not the early stage, and maybe, I'm not making sense here by saying that, is it possible to balance with sales-led type of motion into experimenting something that could actually be more sustainable?
Yes. And I think most companies do this. Like a lot of companies have multiple growth motions or go-to-market strategies. So pairing PLG with something else. I've seen companies launch with PLG only, and then later add product-led sales on top or account-based selling on top to move more up markets. I've also seen companies do it the other way around, start fully sales-led just to get a lot of people on the phone, basically, and then move to PLG. I've seen companies start on both ends simultaneously. Again, there's no one-size-fits-all answer on what you should do. I think,
or A/B testing these two different motion.
Yeah, sort of, right? It's not really a good thing to A/B test, right? Because there's just so many factors that are different.
That's true.
Like it's really not a control and a variant. It's just two completely different beasts. And I think not in most cases, one is not better than the other. In some cases, for your business model, one is just distinctly better than the other. But for a lot of businesses, they kind of need to run both simultaneously because they cover a different market or they help them with different needs. Which of course conflicts with another thing I'd like to say is please focus and don't try to do too many things at once. This is why I see a lot of companies kind of build them up in tandem, like not in parallel. But there are clear benefits to either motion. But in some industries, of course, it's very hard nowadays to launch without a PLG motion simply because customers are expecting it.
Okay, cool. We've got a second question. What are some real world examples of companies that have successfully implemented evidence-based product management and achieved significant business outcome?
Yes. Well, there's the
that
classics.
You know of.
Yeah, I can name the classics, which are Airbnb, Dropbox, Facebook, Pinterest, right? If you read any book on this topic, these are the classics that are always being wheeled out. These are like Airbnb famously runs, I think, like 100 experiments per week, super experiment driven. Initially launched with an MVP of just the founders having people crash on their friend's couch.
That's right.
So really like living that stuff. So like if you just Google this, you'll find those examples. However, I've also seen it in my vicinity, right? And I feel it in my favorite tools to use. For example, I really enjoy using Airtable. Airtable is a tool that makes me feel like I'm not an idiot when I work with numbers. Thank you. I really like working with pitch because this presentation is created on pitch. I can make stuff look less than horrible, which I cannot do on PowerPoint. And I feel like they Miro as well, for example, and all of these companies have great UX, I think, are just amazing to use, like super smooth. Once you go there, you can never go back. And the only way they achieve that is by using a lot of experimentation. So firstly, they, of course, use their own dog food. They use their own tools all the time, but they're super heavy on experimentation, talking to users, shadowing users. There are big research teams that are focused on this, right? And it pays off for sure in revenue numbers, but also for me as a customer, it's just super pleasant to use.
So there is actually a follow-up question to the earlier question asked by the same audience. How do you then identify and address the unmet customer needs and to improve the product satisfaction and to drive revenue growth in that regard?
So there's a variety of ways to do that. So I lean on a lot of frameworks, and then in the situation, I kind of modify them, right, to see what actually, like, there's that pragmatism coming in again. So one way I kind of showed you in the presentation, which is an opportunity solution tree, which I think is a fantastic tool to do exactly that, right? Because it starts with the outcome on top, right? This is the maybe improving product satisfaction or the increasing a conversion rate or something like that. And it taps into opportunities, which are things that are maybe currently blocking the customer from helping you achieve that metric, backing that up with evidence so you follow the right path. So these opportunities can be unmet customer needs, can also be unmet customer desires, right? Not everything is a need. There are some things they don't need. There are some things that don't hurt, but they would delight them if they exist. Another way of going at it, which is different, right? I think I like to use this opportunity solution tree to kind of very much understand the product as it is today. However, you can also use it to go much broader and try to map out the industry as it stands today, right? So you can kind of frame it how you want. Another approach that I like to use is ODI, outcome-driven innovation, which is a predecessor of jobs to be done, which kind of asks differently. You already have some customers who are helping successfully. You speak with them and you try to compile a job map. So you're probably solving this one thing for them, right? You're helping them purchase a product. And then you kind of try to understand what other steps they go through, like where in their journey is this step? How do they prepare for purchasing a product? How do they select the right thing to choose? And how did they conclude purchasing the product? How did they compare whether the thing was successful, whether they're happy? So this method kind of tries to outline every single step, can be like 8 or 9 steps. And underneath each of these steps, try to identify unmet needs of these customers. So what is not solved in each of these steps, and then try to collect evidence which unmet need is burning, is still on fire. They do this by running surveys, a lot of surveys, and kind of tap into that unmet need. So there you kind of go for adding more services, trying to get more jobs done or more job steps done for the customers you already have. So these are different ways that you can do that. Each can work, depends on where you're at in your organization, what makes sense.
So experimentation, it's the key. and to just find what works for you, and then just sort of like scale that repeated process to get the results that you want.
Yeah, and I would always say discovery and experimentation.
Discovery.
Because experimentation kind of requires that you kind of have some idea what you're experimenting with, right? Like experimentation is like you throw some darts.
Yep.
But you need to have a dartboard already to throw at. Otherwise, you're just going to throw darts at the wall. And I think discovery helps you get that dartboard.
So can you shed some light on the discovery process that you sort of, before I invited you, I actually read one of your work. You were writing, I think, discovery and validation process to help early stage startups to sort of find their footing around product. So would you like to, shed some light on that? Like what you find helpful for the, very early stage founders to begin with in their, product discovery stage, or like, in their ideation or validation phase? Yep.
So I think the discovery phase should be ongoing, right? This is something that early stage startups must be good at, simply because they don't have enough data to just go with experimentation. So they need to do a lot of discovery work, and they don't have any well-founded assumptions yet, right? They have just assumptions that they pulled out of thin air at the worst, in the best case out of like deep knowledge of the industry, which is most of the times the case, right? So it's robust. Nonetheless, these are assumptions that needs to require a lot more work before you can run any more expensive tests on them. But I think discovery should be a part of the process always, should never stop. So I very much like doing discovery. So I interview customers quite a bit. So I try to always be talking to customers, which isn't as easy as you may think, because sometimes customers don't want to talk to you, different problem. I think shadowing customers is really helpful. So if you want to learn about your own tool, you shadow them using your tool. If you don't have one yet, or you want to learn something different, you can shadow them as they use the other tools, the alternatives that might be cobbled together, or you might work with them, sit with them for a day, right? And just kind of see how they go about their day. So I think shadowing is great. Yes, there's a variety of discovery methods that you can apply that are far better at telling you about the surroundings of the customer that are outside of your product, which is so relevant, right? So you need to know the context. Otherwise, you're just kind of staring at this one point, but you're missing the bigger picture. And it's the only way to understand why users are doing what they're doing, because they will hopefully narrate their thoughts for you and not just what they are doing. Same with like, I'm a big fan of creating a super crappy prototype, right? Like a simple click dummy, and just asking people to click through it and narrate their thoughts to their process. This will not give you statistically significant results, right? Maybe you have 5 people, like let's say a really low number, only 5. You can learn a lot from listening to these 5 people, really a lot, potentially more than watching 100 people actually use it. So I definitely recommend you doing that. And I always recommend every startup I work with to try to build a customer advisory group, which is like just a fancy term for basically every time you talk to a customer, you ask them, could I reach out to you again for feedback, right? Can we work together? Of course, no strings attached. We will not push you to do anything, but it really would help us. If you kind of build that up and have engaged customers who will give you feedback regularly, that's golden.
And any approach style to recommend in how to approach this customers, especially your early customers, where trust, or maybe confidence, I wouldn't say trust but confidence hasn't been built solidly there yet. I mean, they're your first time customer because they saw, okay, you've got a nice promotion, I came in, gave you a chance to try it out, but they don't like what they see, but you want to interview them. Then how then do you approach that? Or like how, or maybe I should say, how do you conduct an effective interview with customers who have churned? Maybe that would be the right.
What was the last? Customers who have
churned away.
Churned. Oh, okay.
Yes.
So this
How do
is
you
super
basically,
important.
how do you approach them again when they don't want to talk to you, or like they're disappointed with your product after giving you a go, you know?
So this is very, very hard, right? It is much,
Yeah.
much easier to talk to users who like your products
Yep.
than users who don't like your products. But
That's
you
right.
want to talk to both because, right, it's very important to understand the people who didn't like your products.
Correct.
I would expect far lower answering rates, right? Like it's super difficult to get these people on the phone.
Mm.
Again, makes a big difference whether you're more sales-led or product-led growth as an engine, because if you had sales-led growth, you might have a key account manager, or you might have a sales manager who's been in touch with them before, somebody they spoke with already, who can speak with them again. This is more natural than if I clicked sign up for free on the website and now I didn't like it within 2 weeks and somebody's going to call me. For a user, this is maybe quite strange. You can offer money. You might need to offer money. Right?
Yep.
And I think, although we know it's super important to speak with these people, except that it's very hard to get them on the phone.
Yep.
You can already learn a bit with just a quick survey at the end, right? Just like have them maybe just an open comment and say, okay, maybe just type in one sentence of why you churned. It will not get you as much value as an interview, but it might be better than nothing. Right?
Yep.
So I think this is absolutely a very tricky part. But of course, the stronger your relationship was with them before, if they've had a human touch point before, it makes it more likely that they will have one again.
Before we answer another question, still on the discovery bit, any favorite discovery framework that you recommend for, a pre-seed founder at the earlier stage to do their planning, their ideation, that kind of discovery?
Yes. So one thing that I quite like is Itamar Gilad's GIST framework.
Yes, Itamar.
Yes, yeah. I really
GIST.
like this. I think it's goals, ideas, steps, and tasks.
Yes.
I like the
Very
simplicity
simple.
of this. Exactly. It's so simple. And he's also done away with kind of this complexity distinguishing between learning goals or product metrics. He just has goals, and it can be not anything, but like it's quite broad, his concept of goals, which I like. It's very pragmatic. And then in the second, it's kind of like a Kanban board, right? It has goals, and then in the next stream, it has ideas. So these are ideas that may or may not contribute to us reaching these goals, which you can come up with through the opportunity solution tree, right? You can merge frameworks as people usually do. And then in the next one, steps, you outline a variety of tests that can help test that. I'm saying tests, not experiments. Because experiments, the only, I think, scientific experiment out there is A/B testing for us. And this comes relatively late in the funnel because A/B tests are either very risky or they are very expensive, one of the two. Very risky if you just put a static image on there that doesn't work, like a feature stub to just check how many clicks there are. This is cheap, you can learn, but you'll expose maybe 1% of your customers to that, which is risky. Or expensive because you build the fully fledged feature as a variant, which you should not do unless you're very sure that this is going to actually drive results.
So when do you recommend startups in which of the development phase that should consider doing A/B testing?
At the end of the test cycle, right? So I think you can validate, like when you come in with an idea that has a lot of assumptions hanging underneath it that are very risky at this point. Ideally, you have an assumption that underpins multiple ideas so that if you test that one assumption, you just can strike out multiple ideas. So you have this super risky assumption. I would start with the cheapest test method at that point, right? As Itamar also suggests. So for example, you do this super lo-fi click dummy and you have 5 people click through it and you get some learnings from that. And maybe your idea already dies or your hypothesis already dies. And you kind of build up the complexity of the tests as you learn more. So he has this nice, also on his website, this kind of mock-up for one of these boards. And under steps, there's like 3 or 4 steps. So 3 or 4 tests that kind of build up in complexity over time. And the big benefit of doing it this way is that you will not have one data point to validate your assumption, but you will have multiple,
Mm.
because each test could have a false positive or a false negative, right? You might be wrong.
Mm.
It's not science, also, right? It's product. It's not clean science.
Yep.
So by conducting 3 or 4 tests and not 1, you are much more likely to make the right decisions in the end.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. For those who don't know, Itamar Gilad, it's one of the product gurus out there. Yeah, we've got lots of wonderful stuff, lots of frameworks, but at the same time, very practical ways of using them. And he writes very good content. And yeah, can always Google Itamar, Itamar, and Gilad, Gilad. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, else. So before we ask a few more questions, this if it's still fresh, we were talking about how to interview churn customers, right? So there's one question from the audience is, what if there's not a lot of customers who would like to engage in surveys or like interviews when they're churning away? So how do we then increase the likelihood of customers to engage?
Yeah, I've been there. And I think this question is also just generally, I think,
right.
What if not a lot of customers want to talk to you or fill in surveys at all? This is a spot where I have been, in fact. I think there's a variety of things you can try. Of course, you might need to offer money.
Yeah.
This is
Or
just
like
a very likely
vouchers,
thing.
Amazon gift vouchers.
Something.
Yeah.
Exactly. Another thing that has really helped me is to talk to people at the right moment. So what I've done at first is maybe write a mass email every week to everybody who upgraded to paid in that week, right? And got very little responses, because I just wasn't capturing people at the right moment, and they're not checking their inbox. It's not the right medium. So what helped me was to ask them as they are in the product, right? So I had a pop-up in the product that is prompted at a certain moment when they have experienced enough of the product. So maybe not when they're churning. You can also do this when they churn, of course. After they cancel, you can say, can you please talk to us with a link? But for active users, you can put up a prompt or like a survey within the product when they're actively using it, when they have had enough experience, and say, do you want to talk to us? Please schedule a Calendly, like a demo on Calendly or whatever. It will be 15 minutes. Here you still have a delay, right? So they're active in the product. You're targeting at the right moment, but then they need to schedule something for later, which can work, but it's again a barrier. If you have staff that is online most of the time during business hours, you can say, talk to us right now, right? There are also AI bots that will do this conversation for you. Never as good as a human doing it, right? So the whole thing is that it's a real conversation. But it can be a solution if you don't have staff online all of the time and you notice that people aren't actually scheduling calls because it's too far in the future. So I think striking when the iron is hot is probably the best advice that I can give you.
Very good. Can you share an example of a situation where data-driven insights help navigate or overcome a potential risk in product development? Another question from the floor.
Oh, let me think. Of course, many. I'm just trying to think of a good one. Yes. And so one situation that I can talk about is at some point with one of the companies that I was advising, we detected one customer opportunity, which was in the onboarding flow. And so we detected a success gap, as you may call it, like basically a point where they were dropping off, where there was clearly too much friction. So something was going wrong. And this happened at the step where they had to invite other members of their team, which is a very important step, was a very important step for us because we really needed them to invite members of the team to really get value out of it, right? Because it was a collaborative tool. And there was a lot of drop-off happening there. So we ideated a bunch of solutions, and there was one solution that I was very much in love with that I thought was going to be great, which was relatively complex to build, or like took a bit more time. change kind of some of the architecture, change some of the flow. But I was really betting on this. I thought like, okay, this is the thing, right? But then somebody else in my team said, okay, I think if we just change the image, right? Like something super simple, I think that's it. Or it could be that, right? I'm not saying that I think that's it, but it could be that that's the thing. And I was thinking it's going to be the big thing, right? So we tested both solutions. And of course, as you might already see coming, it was the super simple solution that did it by far, right?
Right.
So if I'd gone with my gut feeling, I would have done a very complex thing that would take several weeks. And in the end, it was just changing out an image or making it smaller. So I'm glad that we use an experiment-driven way of working.
Right. We actually still have some time for some last few questions, but I've got some. What are your I know there are lots of reports out there right now. You're right, like OpenView, they share a lot of product SaaS benchmarks report. I think they recently just published one. But let's say for most of the SaaS software startups, what are some of the rule of thumb for a very early stage? If let's say they're tackling certain verticals that they think that it may be, I don't know, let's say unique or whatsoever. Everybody likes to think that. But let's just say if someone's listening, if they can, like a takeaway from them, what are some of your rule of thumbs, benchmarks for conversion rate, product activation rate, conversion rate, to think about?
Sure. So if it's about PLG, there's these classic ones that I think I also nicked from Kyle Polar, who does very well at this, right? As you mentioned.
That's right.
So I think for freemium to paid, it's like 2 to 5%. If it's a free trial to paid, it's like 10 to 13% conversion rates that you should have in mind. These are industry benchmarks, right? But what you really need to think about, like what makes economical sense for you.
That's right.
Right? Because maybe 2 to 3% conversion rate is the industry standard, but maybe that does not allow you to run a profitable business because your operational costs are so high. So then
move the needle.
It doesn't help you, right? Like it doesn't help you to rely so much. The key takeaway that I would give to any starting B2B SaaS company, not in terms of benchmarks, but I think the real elephant in the room, the real problem is that it's we can tweak the onboarding, right? We can tweak every step. We can tweak the customer journey. We can try to get them to AHA sooner. And this is like what a lot of people stare at. Like I like somebody called this funnel vision, not tunnel vision, but funnel vision, like really staring at this thing. What we really need, and the biggest challenge, is competitive differentiation. Does our product really need to exist? Is there really a target audience segment that has an unmet need or something that is not being solved in the market yet? And there's this huge proliferation of SaaS products. There are so many out there. That this is the key problem, right? I feel like there are so many lines of codes written that do not need to exist. And that's the point. If your product is not doing something better than somebody else for a specific person, you can tweak the onboarding flow as much as you want. But the competitive differentiation aspect is the core thing you should be thinking about.
But so how much of the product differentiation is enough in this competitive context, Because everyone would, especially, fresh founders or first-time founders, they will always think, their solution or their design, it's better than the other one. It's like looking at the market competitive landscape. Usually fresh founders will always, put them at the upper, right quadrant where no one exists in that space. But, so yeah, how much differentiation should fresh founder think of? That it's enough, like it's wide enough, like, okay, I am really doing something differentiated here in an evidence-based method. Is there a framework? Is there something that that could help in this regard?
Sure. I would say it doesn't matter whether you as a founder think you're differentiated. It matters whether your customer thinks so, right?
Right.
So I think there, again, you'll see this in your metrics. So there maybe the lagging indicators do matter, right? Like you feel this in how hard is it to close a sale,
Mm-hmm.
right? How can you like if you I always think it begins with understanding your target audience, like who is your product for? This is where me and marketing people have are a lot alike. So if you think you know who the product is for, if it's very, very tedious and very, very hard for you to sell to them, then maybe you have a differentiation problem. I talk about differentiation because I think in SaaS, this is a key problem. There's just so many solutions to the same problem over and over. And maybe you think your product is better, but if your customers aren't convinced, then it's not.
So
and
what
the next
happened?
one is retention, of course. Like the next one is retention. Yeah.
That's right. So what happens when you are differentiating on the tech side, where it's totally backend, and your product, you're trying to claim that you're better than an existing player, and even so, that's the reality, but your customer don't think so. Then how do you then, approach that? Obviously, the tech guys will have to work with the product guys, but in the event, let's say, the tech guys are also the product guys for a very, early small team. Like, how would they go about with this then? If let's say they have really come about with some innovative tech solution, much better than the incumbents, but like the customer don't know that, then how do you then make them see that value?
I mean, there's a huge difference between customer doesn't know and customer doesn't care.
Good one. Yep.
Right. We often think like you can have a differentiator somewhere and it can be true that you're totally different. But if customers don't care about this thing where you are better, then it doesn't, or if your customers don't care, then it's not going to go anywhere. So either you change the differentiator, like if the customers don't care, or you change the customers. You find a customer group that does care. Right. Because I've been there as well. And I try to educate the market. So I try to explain to my target customers why our tool is better, because our tool was better. My learning was it is impossible. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe there are people who are much better at this than I am. But to me, it was impossible to educate the market, to change people's minds. Like I could. So this was a compliance tool, for example, where we helped them be compliant with the CCPA, and we were telling them about how our tool was better. It just was, right? The UX was just much better, and how important it was to be compliant. And the truth was that they don't care. They didn't care. And I could talk to them for hours, and they were like, yeah, totally. But they just don't inherently care. And this is not something you can change. So I think that's why it's so important to confront your value proposition to the market super early on, please, before you start building anything, to make sure that people actually care a little bit, that they are experiencing a pain or a need that is recurring, that is strong enough for them to be willing to consider you. Because otherwise, you might be differentiated on something that nobody cares about.
Yep. Right. Our time is up, but if I may ask a last question, I think it's super relevant to you because you came from a different field, and now that you're great at what you're doing with this. So for someone who would like to start out, in product management, how would you advise them to start, having gone through that process yourself?
So I think in general, the best product managers come from a wide variety of backgrounds. The best product teams have people who are complementary and very, very different. So I think there are a variety of entry points, right? I see a lot of business analysts going this way, or technical people going this way, but I'm a lawyer who went this way. And I think you can come from any direction. The start is, gosh, this is very hard to answer.
What are some of the actionable tips or books that you recommend, like some very simple, to get started on PM, especially an evidence-based PM one?
Yeah. So I think the best, you can read a lot of books, right? I can give you a whole list of things to read. I already mentioned Teresa Torres, Continuous Discovery Habits, Working Backwards. I quite liked. I like Sean Ellis's Hacking Growth. There's a variety of books that I can recommend to you. I quite like to read books that are on marketing, growth, and product, and not only product, right? I like this variety. The key thing is I would try to find a working environment where you can learn. So don't go for the money necessarily. Don't go for the sexy title. Don't look necessarily for a job, but look for a mentor. So I would, of course, at the moment it's a tight labor market, but try to look for a company where you are surrounded by people who you respect, who are really, really good, who are humble, who are good listeners, but who are experienced and can pull you up. A company that has, you know, a culture with the right mindset, a growth mindset, a learning mindset, an experimental mindset. Because if you surround yourself, if you're in the wrong surrounding, like very feature driven, maybe a little bit toxic or negative, you will also learn that, right? You kind of become who you surround yourself with. So I think the most important thing is to look for a nurturing environment, so that you can pull yourself up by people who are better than you or more experienced than you.
Thank you very much for that, Els. It's been insightful learning, you know, even for me. And I hope for the audience too, especially in the very early stage, now that, you know, they have practical tips that can just get started on tomorrow, you know, to do things very data-driven and evidence-based approach. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll hopefully speak again soon, and maybe next time we can get you to come back to talk about you know, other things, PM related, or you know, anything that you would like to share with us with.
Sure, anytime. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Bye.